Welcome to the Indie Pub, a laid-back interview show dedicated to the world of self and indie publishing. I'm your host, Jay Rushing, author of the self-published fantasy noir novel Radio, and a beverage buff with a passion for deep dives and good times. Every 2 weeks, a guest will step into the pub with a publishing-related topic and a favorite drink for us to explore and enjoy. Whether you want to sharpen your craft, snag a new cocktail recipe, or just have a laugh, there's always a seat and a full glass waiting for you at the Indie Pub. Welcome to the Indie Pub. Today's guest is author Justin Lee Anderson, winner of SPFBO 6 with the novel The Lost War, and author of the Audie Award winning novel Carpet Diem. He's here to discuss the fine art of beta reading. But before we dive in, tell us a bit about what we're drinking here in the pub today.
So we have quite got the same drink as we've discussed. So what I'm drinking is my second favorite whiskey in the world, which is Ardbeg 10-year-old, which is just a beautiful, peaty, light-coloured single malt from Islay. Whereas I know you've got my favorite whiskey in the world, Lagavulin, which is a darker, peatier, richer Islay malt.
Yes, yeah, I have the Lagavulin here, and it's funny because I tend to be more of an Ardbeg guy, so we've got reverse roles today, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we will dive in deeper into all of the possible whiskeys because it's whiskey and it's wonderful. Yeah. All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, so as you said, I'm Justin Lee Anderson. I was, before I published my first novel, I was a professional writer and editor across a lot of different media for, I always say 15 years. It's about 15 years. I can't remember exactly how many, but it's in that region. And I worked across lots of different things. I worked on magazines, websites, loads of different stuff, but not actually books. I did some nonfiction books. I did some sort of guidebooks and things like that. But I hadn't done any work in fiction. And then I had my first novel, Carpet Diem, was published back in 2015. Yeah, that's right, 2015, by a small press called Wild Wolf at the time. And it did well. It sold well. It got good reviews. In 2008. And then we got a deal with that to put that onto audio, which is where it then won the Audie Award with Tanter Publishing. In 2018, I had an offer from a friend to set up business to basically publish my stuff, and so we did that. We took back the rights to Carpet Diem and republished it ourselves, and then the following year published The Lost War, which is something that had been kind of in the back of my mind for a while I wanted to do. And then that won SPFBO 6, and that kind of blew my mind. And so I'm currently, I've got 100% record on publishing books and having them win something. So
That's awesome.
I've no pressure to keep that up whatsoever, obviously. But and now I've written the first draft of the second book in the Eden series, which is the follow-up to The Lost War. There's going to be 4 in total. But currently, it's all a bit in limbo because I've got an agent now off the back of winning SPFBO, and we are shopping the series to see if there's a deal to be done with a publisher. So we will see what happens with that.
Oh, that's great! Congrats!
Thank you.
Big congrats on winning SPFBO for 2020. And for those who don't know, that's the self-published fantasy blog off. And can you tell us a little bit about your journey with that competition? I was in that competition as well. I had a blast. So tell us how it went for you.
It was a bit mad. I first entered it back with Carpet Diem when I published it myself in 2018. I hadn't heard of SPFBO until I just came across it, I think right about as the announcement came up that they were open for entries. And I just thought, I'll put this in. And it had gone quite, the book had been going well. I'd had good reviews. It was selling pretty consistently. And so, if anything, I probably went into that with a bit more, I don't want to say confidence, because you're never confident of winning something, but a bit more hope, I suppose, that it might do well. And it bombed straight out. Like one of the first books cut from one of the first blogs that cut, but it just, and it being a comedy, sometimes it's just so subjective. And if your reader doesn't get your sense of humor, like it gets even in reviews now, it gets a lot of like, why do people think this is funny? It's garbage. But comedy is comedy.
Yeah.
Just because you think it's funny, if it doesn't appeal to, it's just that nothing is universally funny, basically. So that bombed out. And so when I came in last year with The Lost War, I deliberately came in with no expectations. I was like, we'll just see what happens. It'll be a useful thing. It's a different style of book. It's not a comedy. It's an epic fantasy mystery. I kind of tend to describe it. And I just came in thinking, we'll see how this goes. It'd be amazing to get anywhere with it and get some reviews for it. It was already doing okay. It had a couple of good reviews from some big blogs, and it had decent reviews from a couple of magazines. So I was like, it's going in the right direction anyway. And then it made the semis, and I was like, amazing. And then it made the fight. There's a funny story behind. I don't know if I've told this story actually. The funny story behind the fact that it was a finalist. Petros from Booknest messaged me on Facebook Messenger, and he was like, "Hey man, I just wanted to get in touch and say, listen, before I announce my finalist, I'm really sorry. I really enjoyed your book, and I liked it a lot, but it wasn't quite there for me, and I just wanted to let you know in advance it's not going to be my finalist." And I was like, "Oh, all right, okay, cool." It's like that moment. It's almost like, I want to thank you for crushing me. It's like, and I was like, okay, cool. That's I really, and I genuinely did appreciate him telling me before the announcement. It was like, it was a cool thing to do, except he was joking. He was winding me up. He wanted to have me there thinking that I was out. And like literally as he was telling me that, I saw a ping come up on Facebook saying, Petros has posted in SPFBO. And I went to SPFBO and he's like, announced me as far as I was like, dude, your SPFBO post appears to disagree with you.
Oh, that's crazy.
So he was just like, sorry, I'm an ass.
Well, at least if you're going to pull a prank, the outcome being better than the prank itself is always
nice. I mean, that's the nice way to do it. That's the nice way to do a wind up on somebody, is to tell them something bad and then actually give them something good. The other way around is just mean.
All right. So you're currently beta reading for another author and have done so in the past as well.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick description of what beta reading is, and then describe what a beta reader's role is?
Sure. So beta reading is basically just reading, not the first draft of a book, because you shouldn't. The only person that ever sees my first draft of my books is my wife, because I can have a conversation with her about, well, yeah, I know that doesn't work, but I'm going to fix that. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So I call her my alpha reader. And so she's the only person that reads the first draft, and she just gives me her immediate feedback on very high level stuff, even more high level than beta. Once you've done an edit and you've got it to a point where you think you're relatively happy with it, that's when you go to a beta reader. And the beta reader's job is to not, which is something a lot of beta readers mistake, is to not pick up on typos.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Tell you that a sentence in chapter 3 didn't quite work for them, because it's way too granular at that. That's not the level you're looking for. You're looking for a much higher level. You're looking for, what did you think of the story? What did you like? I mean, that's always an important thing to include as a beta reader. What did you like? What was good?
Absolutely.
Because I mean, A, it's useful to know what things are working well, but B, writers have tiny fragile egos and we need them to be stroked, because otherwise we fall apart. But it's story, it's character, it's world building, it's the big stuff. You want to know, like, what did you want more of? What worked for you? Did this scene make sense? Did anything not make sense? How did you feel about this character? How did you feel about this twist in the story? That's the kind of stuff you're looking for from a beta reader, because what you almost want from them is to give you their experience just as a reader. I mean, that's why they're a beta reader. You just want to know, like, as a reader, if this was the final book, if this was the book that you had bought and taken home and read, what would you think about it? How would you feel about it? Because it's that feedback at that early stage, and that another viewpoint, an objective viewpoint, that gives you the pointers of things that you need to work on, that you need to develop, that you need to add to, that can make your book better, basically.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times with beta readers, especially the ones who really dig deep on typos and grammar, they forget that it's just a lot of wasted work, because there's going to be rewrites. Not, a lot of what they're actually reading isn't going to be there in the end. So it's
absolutely
just wasted time.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is important to mention as well is that the experience of the writer matters to the kind of feedback that you give. And what I mean by that is, so I used to write for an organization that does like learning materials for professionals, and I did a lot of research into like how to provide effective feedback, essentially. And something that I learned from that is that the more of an expert someone is on something, the more negative feedback is useful to them. Whereas at an early stage, the amateurs, the new people to something, they will benefit more from more positive feedback.
Yeah.
So, at an early stage, when they need to know when they're doing something right, because that helps them to know what to do right.
Yeah.
The more experienced ones, telling them what's going well is not as useful, because they kind of know what they're doing well. What they want to know is there anything they're not getting quite right that they could improve on? So if you're beta reading for somebody on their first novel, you need to be more supportive and positive, while also giving them important critical feedback in a constructive way. Whereas with somebody who's on their 15th novel, they're probably not as worried about you telling them what you liked, although nobody doesn't like being told they liked something. But what I mean is, what's more useful to them is going to be the stuff where you can say, well, this scene didn't quite make sense to me, or this character's decision there seemed contradictory to what they said earlier, and these kind of things are more useful at that stage. So the experience level of the writer is also an important factor to take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. I feel for myself that I'm definitely at the brutalize me stage. Like I enjoy getting the shit kicked out of me during the beta steps, but that definitely is something I grew into. It wasn't necessarily something that I stepped into right away.
No, and that's that's an important factor as well, because the other thing you need to consider is, what does the writer want from you?
Yes,
that's the other thing. And I think as a writer, the best way you're going to get the kind of feedback you're looking for is to be very clear with your beta readers as to what you want.
Yes.
If you can say, look, here's what I need. Here's what I'm not. This is not helpful. I don't want that. That's for 3 edits down the road. This is not right now. What I need is this stuff. This is what I want to know about. And and the more confident you become, the more experienced you become. Absolutely, the thicker skin you grow, and the more you're prepared to hear people say, "Yeah, this doesn't work. Fix this. This storyline just goes nowhere. Do something with it."
Yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that you want to hear, and that's the kind of stuff that is ultimately the most useful, because if people are pulling their punches, they're preventing you from making your work as good as it could be. And if what you put out to readers who buy your book and read your book, they're going to read it. They're maybe going to pick up on the same things that your beta reader was reticent to mention, maybe because they didn't want to be too brutal. They're going to read it, and that's at that point, there's nothing you can do about it. At that point, when you start getting reviews in from strangers who are not going to be afraid to be brutal, then you're going to be like, oh, there's this massive flaw. I can't do anything about that now.
Yeah. I like to think about it as your beta readers are kind of like your sparring partners. Like you want them to absolutely beat you before the fight, so that when you get to the fight, you're ready for the big beating you're going to take from your actual opponent. And they're it's like pain with kindness, I guess you could say. Just that directed, focused. How do you be as honest as you can be while still being helpful? Because the ultimate goal is being helpful, right? You're beta reading to help the author. So absolutely,
exactly that. You're there to help them make it better, and the best way to do that is to be honest. And arguably, yes, to be brutally honest. But what's also important, where you can, I mean, not all. The thing about beta readers is not all beta readers are writers.
Yeah.
And so something I try to do is I try to if I say to somebody this doesn't work, what I also try to do is give them a suggestion as to how I think they can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's useful. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be the way they go with it, or but it gives them something to work with. It gives them an idea of what you think might have been better. It's not just saying this doesn't work, but if you can say this doesn't work, here's why it doesn't work. Here's the specific problem I think it has, and here's maybe an idea or two on what you could do instead that would make it work.
Mm-hmm.
That's really useful feedback, because it's not just criticizing, it's also giving some directions to go in.
So for your own work, do you use beta readers?
I do.
And I have a question for this, because I'm curious. How many? Because I find the number makes a huge difference.
Well, this is interesting. So for The Lost War, there were, hang on, 1, 2, I got a quick head count. There were like 5 or 6,
mm-hmm.
5, I think, in the end. Yeah, 5, not including my wife, who's the alpha reader, so she's the 6th. And a few, 2 or 3 of them go back to me really quite quickly, and the other 2 took a little bit longer. And what I found was that the sort of the 3 who got back to me quickly, I didn't get anything new from the other 2 that I kind of waited a little bit longer for.
Mm.
So they had kind of covered everything that I was likely to get. So I've already spoken to them again and said probably those 3 will be fine.
Yeah.
But we don't need more than that. So 3, between the 3 of them, and the thing that's important was that they're all friends of mine, but they all also know that I want them to be honest with me and not pull punches.
Yeah.
And they also, and I think this is possibly the single most crucial thing, they also read in the genre.
Yeah.
And that's really, I mean, they were able to, for example, I've never read, I just haven't. I've never read David Gemmell or David Eddings. And those were 2 names that came out from that group of 3 that were like, this really reminds me of this stuff, of these guys. And that was really it was interesting to me from nothing else, from a marketing perspective. It gave me a notion of somebody, comparative authors I could be thinking about that were they're helpful to know. But yeah, I mean, so they've been reading in the genre for 20 years, and so they know the genre, and I think that's really important. Find beta readers that read in the genre you're writing, because getting feedback from people who don't read the genre is probably going to push you in directions that, or is not necessarily probably, but is potentially going to push you in directions that is not useful for the readership you're actually aiming for.
Yeah, steer you away from tropes that are maybe the bread and butter of a certain genre or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important. And I mean, equally, it can be good just to have, even if you have hit on a trope and somebody's like, well, I've seen this done before by X, blah, blah, blah. If you've hit on something that has maybe been done very similarly, maybe more famously, maybe arguably better by somebody else, maybe you want to think about doing something different with it. So just having beta readers who know the genre is really important.
Yeah, and I like, I'm glad you said 3, because I have this theory with my beta reading that there's a certain critical mass that is really, really helpful for differentiating between legitimate problems and just opinion. Because I've found that with too few, it's really hard to tell the difference. But once you get to, and it's different for every book and every group of beta readers, but once you get to that critical mass, you can see where the majority lies. If it's just 1 or 2 voices saying this was a problem for me, you might not need to fix anything. But if almost everyone is telling you that didn't work, then it didn't work no matter what you feel about it, right? So just the numbers game of it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. I think, as I say, I think the feedback they gave me was useful. Some of it confirmed stuff that I thought maybe I need to work on that. There was one character in particular in The Lost War who I think in the early drafts was underdeveloped, and sounded too much like one of the other characters and needed a bit more differentiating. And I got a bit of that as I was kind of had that back in my head already. That I was a bit worried about it. And then I kind of got that feedback from the beta readers. And I was like, okay, yeah, so definitely that's a thing I need to do. And so I was able to go back and really focus on her. And she ended up being, because I went back, did that focus, and she ended up being a much more kind of strong, identified character. Out of all of them, she was one of the stronger characters. I think. I mean, this is subjective, of course, but I think she has one of the stronger voices. So, it's just really useful. Sometimes it can just be about confirming suspicions you maybe already have.
So we talked a little bit earlier about some of the information you want to receive from your beta readers. But is there any category of beta reader feedback that you generally ignore, other than some of the proofreading stuff and things like that?
I don't ever ignore anything. I think it's more about how much weight you put on something as to how important it is. So, for example, if one person was to come back and say, "Oh, I didn't like this conversation," it just, it was, again, this kind of comes down to your whole thing about opinions. I didn't like this conversation, made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, or I didn't like this. I didn't like that she said this, or I didn't like that he said that. And if nobody else has said that, and if it hasn't occurred, and if you go back and look at it, and there's a reason why it is the way it is, then I think you can justifiably write that off as just a subjective opinion of somebody's, And I think you have to think about all of it, absolutely. And even if criticism only serves to make you examine why you've made the choices you've made, if you've made the choices you've made, and despite them being challenged, you think, no, that still makes sense to me. There's a reason that's there. You can't go back. You can't argue with reviewers. You can't go back and say to reviewers, well, I know you thought this, but let me explain why it is. And maybe it pushes you to clarify why you made that decision. Maybe it pushes you to make more obvious why you made that decision if it wasn't clear. But if criticism causes you to question yourself enough to find that you do have justification for why you made certain decisions, then I think it's acceptable to decide to not ignore, but to not act on particular feedback.
Yeah, that's a good point. Diving deeper into the actual feedback, as somebody who's both an author and a beta reader, what sort of guidance do you think is appropriate or necessary for a beta reader? So as a beta reader, what do you want the author to tell you about the process they're looking for? And as an author, what do you tell your beta readers you're looking for?
Well, I think the answer to both is probably the same, to be honest. And that is, as I said for me earlier, it's the high level stuff. So I want to know plot, characters, and world building, the three big things. What did you think of those? Those are the areas I want you to focus on. If there are specific individual scenes that particularly worked for you or didn't work for you, I want to know about it. If there's a character you didn't like, if there's a character you didn't like that I wanted you to like, then can you pinpoint why? Can you pinpoint what it was about them? If there's a part of the storyline that doesn't work for you, again, can you try to put your finger on why? What bothered you about it? Because that stuff's all really, really helpful. Because again, it might be that somebody be able to tell you, oh, well, that didn't work for me because of this thing that happened earlier. And what actually you want to change is not the thing that didn't work for them, but the thing that happened earlier. Because maybe the thing that happened earlier is the problem and not the thing that they ended up not liking. So it's high level stuff, but it's also, it's not just the what, it's also the why wherever you can.
All right, well, let's dive back into our drink, our lovely whiskeys we have sitting before us. Yes, so one thing I like to talk about in every episode is the two most overlooked senses in writing, smell and taste. Yeah. So you have your Ardbeg 10 in front of you. If you could go ahead and tell us what you're smelling, what you're tasting, what's coming across with this lovely whiskey.
I mean, it's Ardbeg, so it's peat and smoke. is what I'm smelling. I mean, it's just, oh yeah, it's delicious. It's autumn bonfires. That's what we're getting here.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The thing I love about Ardbegs, and I feel like they do it really well, it's part of why they're one of my favorites, is they get that brininess right.
Yeah.
Little bit of salt in there. It's
just catches the back of your throat with a little bit of heat. I mean, all whiskey does, but Ardbeg really just catches the roof of your mouth.
Yeah. My wife so funny story. I past few years I've been getting myself a birthday bottle each year,
right.
And this year I bought one. It's called Kleinleash. They're 14. It's kind of up north of Inverness a bit, kind of Dalmorey area.
Okay, it's not what I know.
Yeah, it's a smaller one. I had never heard of it, but the reviews were good.
Mm-hmm.
And I opened it up, really, really nice and mellow and delicious. My wife tried it. She's like, "This is my new favorite." She hadn't even finished her glass yet. She's like, "This is my new favorite. You need to go buy yourself a different bottle. This one's mine."
This is mine now.
Yeah. But that one's great too. It's funny for being, opposite coast, nowhere near Isla, but it's does just a touch of smoke and does the briny really, really well. So if you're looking for a really light whiskey, but that has that salty, definitely would recommend that.
That's interesting. Most of the stuff I drink tends to be Isla. Like my sort of top 4 whiskies are basically Ardbeg, Kalila, and Lafroig.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's what I like. And I think it comes back to that. I was kind of spoiled. My introduction to single malt when I was 18. I was out drinking with a mate. I was working backstage in Dundee Rep Theatre while I was at university, and I was out drinking with a guy called Hilly, who was part of the permanent backstage crew. I was just there as a kind of temp student, and we were out drinking, and we kind of got chucked out the pub. We went back to his flat to carry on drinking, and all he had in was the bottle of Lagavulin that he'd bought his dad for Christmas, and he was like, "Oh, we'll just open it. I'll buy him another one." So my first ever introduction.
That's a big step.
Oh, my first ever introduction to good single malt whiskey was a Lagavulin, and nothing I've ever had. I was like, wow, this is mind blowing. This is like, I mean, at 18, when most of what I was drinking was cider.
Yeah.
So it was like, wow, this really kind of blows. But I really liked it, just the complexity of it and the depth and the heat and the smoke and everything. I just really was like, wow. Even, half cut as I was after a night in the pub, I was like, this is special. And it's just remained my favorite ever since. But Isla has always been, I don't know what it is about Isla whiskies. It's the peatiness and the smokiness, I think, that I very rarely drink an Isla and don't think, yep, that's my stuff. That's my jam. But there's one that is completely different. Funnily, as you say, my wife bought us. We were living over in France for a while, and my wife brought it home from the shop. And she was like, "I've never heard of this one, but it was on special offer." I was like, "Okay, cool." And it was Cardu, and it is a really lovely, sweet, light whiskey, which it's like a completely different animal. But it's a really nice, easy drinking. You can just sit and sip at it. And I think it's a good summer whiskey. And it was hot when we were over there, which probably said it's a good summer whiskey because it's just nice and light, and you can quite easily sit and sip it. And so it's almost like, I almost think of it as like a dessert whiskey because it's so much sweeter than the whiskeys I normally drink. But I recommend it if you haven't tried it.
Nice. I think I've had Cardu before. I can't remember. I know I've seen it. As a smoky whiskey guy, have you ever heard of Lechik?
No.
Spelled Ledeg, but pronounced Lechik. It's I believe it's Tobermory's smoky side.
Right. Okay.
It is the weirdest, most enjoyable. It's incredibly bizarre, but so much fun to drink.
Okay.
You look at it, it's light, kind of like Ardbeg, just this light, clear whiskey. You put it up to your nose, and it is meat. It's like a smoked brisket. It's a really delicious meat smell, but your brain can't process it because it's looking at a glass of whiskey that smells exactly like meat, and you think, well, I'm going to try this, but it's not. This isn't going to work out at all. And then you drink it, and it's completely different. Still very smoky, but a completely different smoke. A little bit sweet, really pretty mellow, actually. I mean, it's smoky still, but it's not incredibly bitey. But if you ever get a chance, I don't think it's all that expensive either. But if you get a chance, I would grab a bottle of that just for the if anything, the wow factor with friends. Just be like, you got to try this, man. It's crazy. It's really, it's a fun one.
There's a I can't remember which distillery it is that makes it, but there's a relatively, I think it's still made. I think I've seen it recently. There's a brand done by one of the Islas called Smokehead.
I think I've heard of that.
It's got a big skull on it, I think, if I remember rightly, on the packaging. And I tried that for the fun of it, because I like a smoky whiskey, and it's not bad at all. Like, I can't remember who makes it. As I say, it's one of the Islas, I think. But I was like, oh yeah, this is, and it is exactly as you think. It is just a really smoky, amber whiskey, and it's lovely. It's a good one. It's funny. So Edinburgh is the home of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, which I've been a member of in the past. I'm not currently, because we can't go anywhere. They do a thing where they don't tell you what the distilleries are of all the whiskies that they stock. They just give you, it's got a name that's like, it'll be a description. So it'll be like, bonfires in autumn or something like that. I'm going back to bonfires a lot. It's the kind of whiskey I like. Or it'll be like, licorice boots or something like, it'll be like stuff like that'll be the description. And so I once had one that was described as, it was like described as like, I think just like dessert cake or birthday cake or something like that. And I was like, no way can a whiskey taste like cake. I don't believe it. Oh my God, it was amazing. It was like drinking dessert, but disguised as whiskey. It was the maddest. And to this day, I don't know what I was drinking, but it was just like, wow, the variation of what is essentially the same drink, but the variation in flavor from what I normally drink to this completely different thing was like, holy wow.
It is pretty incredible. All right, so we'll jump back to beta reading. I'm sure we'll get back to whiskey soon. How much time do you think an author should allocate for the beta reading process? Basically, how much time should they give their readers?
I mean, I think there's no set answer to this. I think this is a negotiation with your readers, because ultimately your beta readers are probably doing you a favor.
Yeah.
And I think that the important way to handle this is to manage everybody's expectations up front. So, when you're asking somebody to beta read, I think being clear with them by saying something along the lines of, let's say, would you be interested in doing this? I'd really like your feedback. I'd be looking for feedback in about, say, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Is that going to work for you? Because what you don't want to do is ask somebody to do it, and then they, you don't really give them a clear idea timeline. And then it's been 6 weeks and you're like, what's happening? And they're like, oh, sorry, I haven't even started yet. I didn't realize it was a hurry. So, it's all about communication, and, figure out what you want, figure out what your time scale is, what you would like to be done by. And, figure out what you want, and then take a couple of weeks off it probably, because somebody's gonna need a little bit of extra time, because life just gets in the way, and that's how these things are. And again, these are probably just friends or maybe even family doing you a favor.
Yeah.
So, figure out what your optimal amount of time is, shave a week or two off of it, and then ask if they can do it in that time. And then you've got some wiggle room at the end if they're not quite done when you ask them to be done. But yeah, it's almost a how long is a piece of string thing. The intervening time can be used for a lot of useful things. You could be, it's useful for you just to step away from the book for a while, because then you come back to it with a fresh perspective. So for you to just take 4 weeks away from the book can be a really good thing for you, because it gets your head clear of everything that you had going on, and it lets you come back at it with fresh eyes and see things maybe you wouldn't have seen if you'd gone straight back into it. But it can also give you time, especially if you're an indie, it can give you time to work on stuff like covers. It can give you time to start working with a cover artist and start thinking about that. You can maybe want to start thinking about marketing campaigns and how you're going to launch, and just get away from the writing process for a while, and deal with stuff like that. So it really, what works for you is what works. Really, as long as you communicate up front with your beta readers and make it clear to them what your expectations are, or what expectations is not really reasonable, what your wants are, and give them the opportunity to say, well, actually, I can't do it that quickly.
Yeah. I think your time away point is very, very valuable. I didn't at first, but I've started beta reading myself, basically. So what I'll do is I'll try to give myself at least 2 months off from when I finish. When I send my beta notes, I'd give, even if I'm getting my beta notes back, I still don't touch them, and I'll beta read myself first. So I'll take like a day or two and just blow it out. Just really, really deep dive beta read of my own work after months. And then when I come back to read the beta notes, I've already kind of caught myself on stuff. It's almost a way to pad what's coming, where you're like, yeah, they're going to call me out here. And yes, I know I'm going to need to fix this. And then having them either confirm or deny that kind of helps recenter me before going into the next stages of the process.
Sure.
And that goes into my next question, actually. So once you get your beta notes back, how do you go about processing that? Do you have a certain system that you use for sorting the notes, or do you just take them as they come?
I have a terrible habit. It drives my wife insane, especially since we write scripts together, and this does not help her in any way because she works completely opposite. I have a terrible habit of keeping everything in my head, which I know is not a helpful way to do anything really. So, I mean, the honest answer is I read through all the beta reader notes and I keep them handy. And then I go back in and I kind of already have picked up on the stuff that is like, you know, I've been like, okay, yeah, that needs work. I agree with that. That definitely needs work. That I need to look at, that I need to think about. But I don't really do a great deal, I have to be honest, to organize them. I just kind of keep them handy. I keep them maybe open on one screen while I'm going through it so I can refer to them and look back at them and you know, flick back and forth. So I'm not particularly organized about it, if I'm honest. But that's just because that works for me. Yeah. Because, you know, the way I write is, you know, stuff percolates in my head. It's why it takes me so bloody long to write a book, because stuff percolates in my head and I have ideas, and then it's like, oh, I like that scene. I'm going to let that brew for a little while. And then by the time I actually sit down to write, I've been thinking about it for weeks or months even before and I've got a really good idea of what's going to come out. Then again, having said that, when you sit down at the keyboard and suddenly you realize that a character needs to do a certain thing because that's what that character would do, and it takes you in a different direction. And sometimes, you know, you end up completely surprised by where you end up. But yeah, no, there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to what I do. The only thing I do that's more organized, I suppose, this is going on a slight tangent, is I keep an Excel spreadsheet of where everybody is and what day it is, so that I make sure that people's travel time and stuff makes sense, and you don't have people teleporting from one end of the country to the other.
I do the same thing
up with somebody who they shouldn't be there with. So that's my big organizational thing. Is I have as much planning as I have a spreadsheet that reminds me that, you know, no, I can't have these two bump into each other because they're 3 days travel apart at the moment.
Yeah, I've found that the like pedometer apps that will tell you how far your run is, or that let you plan out a run. I've used those a number of times to figure out how long it's going to take people to walk or run, or, you know, figure out how fast the horse is riding, or, you know, whatever. Yeah. But I found that's pretty helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think most writers have probably Googled how far can a horse travel in a day.
Yeah. So as a beta reader who has worked with authors, you know, they've given you their work, are there any mistakes that you see them making in the approach or execution of the beta reading process that you've kind of noticed creep up from time to time that seem to be kind of commonalities? Or,
well, see, this is where I'm going to contradict everything I've said up to this point in the podcast. So just to be completely contradictory. So what I have done for some writers is I've done like a chapter crit for them, kind of like a beta read of a chapter. And because my background in editing, there are certain things that, I mean, so for example, in my last job before I started writing, we were a team of 4 editors, and we used to write articles and then edit each other's work. So we had shorthand for things like, you know, we would just circle something and write repetition. And what we mean by that is you've used an unusual word too close to it twice and too close to you. So there are lots of little little shorthands that editors will use within each other, which is more about a copy edit than it is about a beta edit, I suppose, or about a content edit, a developmental edit, which is essentially, I mean, a beta read is essentially a light version of a developmental edit, I suppose you could almost call it. So the things that I have tended to see as common mistakes have been where I have had to say, well, look, from a writing perspective, you're making some common mistakes. And there are common mistakes that new writers make. And it is things like, dialogue is all exposition. It's things like repeating words too close to each other. It's run-on sentences. It's, there are quite a few. So I've actually, as a beta reader, sometimes the first thing I've gone back and said is, before we go on, here are some writing tips, because the writing needs some development. The writing needs some work. Yeah. So here are some examples in your writing of what I'm talking about. And again, it's not just about saying what's wrong. It's about saying how to fix it. Mm-hmm. So it's, what I'll try to do is say, here's an example of your writing here. This is why this doesn't quite work. Here's a way I would do this instead. You don't have to do it my way, but this is an option of how you could do it differently to make this work better. And that's the kind of thing where, and again, anybody who asks me to do any kind of reading for them, I always start by saying, listen, I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm known for being a bit brutal, but I'm genuinely just trying to give you feedback to help you. So if you don't want that, that's okay. Yeah. And so generally they say to me, right, okay, I'll get my thick skin on. I'll get a glass of whiskey sitting beside me. Because I don't see the point in giving somebody feedback that tells them what they're doing is better than it is, because you're not helping them at that point, or even omitting to tell them something that is wrong, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So I've occasionally, I have with a number of people, like, the beginning point of it has not been about any of the big high level stuff that I've been talking about. It's been about saying, okay, look, the first thing that probably needs work is the writing. And again, as I say, for debut writers, for new writers, of course it is. Yeah. Because writing is a skill you develop over years, and it's not something that everybody can immediately turn their hand to. I mean, yes, you can be a very natural storyteller. You can naturally have a great idea for a story. But if you're really fascinating story and your great world building and your brilliant characters are inaccessible because the writing is getting in the way of it, then maybe the first bit of feedback you need is, look, your writing needs some work, and here are some tips on how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense, because otherwise it's a wasted beta round, really. Yeah. It's one more actual rough pass is needed before the actual beta reading can take place.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's different for it's going to be different for everything you read. It's going to be absolutely different for everything you read. Some people, just have a natural, strong writing style, and that works. And even if it's not how you would write, as long as it works, as long as it works for the story, as long as it serves the story, the way I tend to think about prose is that the main job of prose is to get out of the way of the story. Mm-hmm. People shouldn't be aware that they're reading. They should be playing the movie in their head, and not thinking about necessarily what they're reading. Now there are exceptions to that, where there are some books that have just got absolutely beautiful prose, where you will read a sentence and go, "Holy crap, that was a beautiful sentence. That was really nice." Yeah. But that's not how I aspire to write. The way I tend to write is, one of the things I love. I mean, Neil Gaiman's one of my favorite authors, and one of the things I've always liked about Neil Gaiman is that I've always described it that I feel like he writes in the voice that I hear inside my head anyway. So it's like there's nothing getting in the way between me taking the story in and him giving me the story. It's just a direct connection. And so that's kind of how I aspire myself to write, in such a way that the prose just gets out of the way of the story. It's there to tell you the story, and that's the purpose that it serves. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really, really good point. With beta reading, I know I feel that every time I beta read for someone else, my own writing levels up a bit. Yeah. Yeah. And I've found that for me, it's
it's all about the separation.
Mm-hmm.
I can only basically practice with myself so much before there's a limit. I'm too close. And so as someone who also beta reads, do you find that work helps your writing? And if so, how for you?
I don't know that I've ever really thought about it, to be absolutely honest. I'm sure it does, because reading good writing and reading a variety of writing is a really good way of improving your own writing. Because you learn from being exposed to other good writing. I mean, it's kind of that simple. But I think also the creativity of other people's minds and their ideas can spark your creativity and spark off ideas in your mind as well. And I'm absolutely sure that variously I've probably, without directly thinking, oh, that's a good idea, I'm going to use that. It's more along the lines of, oh, that's a cool thing. Let me think about something in that kind of way. What else? What other things does that kind of put me in mind of? What kind of tangents does that send me off in? Looking at things from a different perspective and thinking about things from a different way. And I'm sure that reading, other writers' work does that. It sparks off little fires that some of them come to nothing, but some of them maybe catch fire and burn something.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's all those little tools and techniques you can glean along the way. Pick it up. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but you at least have gotten to try it out, or you've at least gotten to get some experience with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I could say, this is not directly related to beta reading. This is just about like reading other people's work. But for example, the way, I was really aware of this recently. The way Joe Abercrombie writes scenes with a lot of different characters, and it kind of a chaotic big scene where he writes a lot of small, one scene characters, and he very quickly establishes them as a character. He's really good at giving you you're maybe going to read 3 or 4 pages of this character at all, but he still very quickly gets you in. This is a real character. This character has a life and a depth and a personality, and he's particularly brilliant at that. And so I've definitely learned from that. I know I've learned from that because I've consciously thought about it. And that's the kind of thing you can pick up from reading other good writing is, here's a good way to do this. Yeah. Here's a good example of how this works well. I know I haven't actually, I've had it on my bookshelf for ages, but Anna Smith Spark, I essentially credit her with teaching me how to write battle scenes, despite the fact I haven't actually read her book yet. But it was she spoke at a con I was at a couple of years ago when I was still writing the first draft of The Lost War. And she talked about how she approaches writing battle scenes. And I had come at it from the perspective almost because of the kind of role-playing roots of the characters I used in The Lost War. I had come at it almost from a perspective of trying to describe what everybody was doing in the way that happens during a role-playing campaign. And it was clunky and it didn't work and it wasn't good. And she was just talking on this panel, and she said, the way I'd like to approach it is I focus on one person and what they're experiencing and what they're feeling and what they're going through, and it becomes a much more personal, emotional, raw experience. And I was like, yes, that's what I need. So I went back and rewrote all the battle scenes I'd written up to that point, and then from now, anytime I'm writing a fight scene, that's my approach. It's you focus on one person and their experience of it, because a lot of fighting is just chaos. A lot of fighting is just holy crap, panic, try and stay alive, and that's much more visceral and real and interesting for people to read than what is essentially describing a diagram of how 6 different characters are interacting. That's dull, and it's not a good way to do it. So there you go. There's a couple of examples of definitely ways I've picked up from other writers, and I think writers naturally read other writing with a slightly analytical eye and with their kind of mind open to suggestions of things that are interesting that they might want to put into use themselves later.
All right, let's jump back to our drink one last time for the episode.
Okay.
And we're going to look at it from more of a world-building, scene-setting approach. What do you think the right mood for this drink is? What would go well with it? What's the perfect setting? If you were transported anywhere with this Ardbeg in your hand, where would that place be? What would be there? How is it populated? All of those good questions.
So here are I have two answers for this because I couldn't pick between them. So the first, and the one that kind of came to me straight away, is kind of at a lakeside forest, sitting by a campfire, chilling as the evening's turning dark, sitting around with some mates, with one of these in my hand, just smelling the pine in the air, sipping on this whiskey. That's a good night. That's a good night coming. But the other one, and it's kind of harking back to a friend of mine and I. There's a hotel out in, again, I don't know if it's still, there used to be a hotel out in East Lothian, not far from us, called Grey Walls. And we once, a friend and I once went there doing a review of the restaurant, and we stayed in the hotel in the night. Anyway, after the meal, we were sitting in this beautiful old library that was part of the hotel. And it was a real kind of, red leather, old tomes, the smell of dust and vanilla in the air from the books. It was that kind of place. That I think there was a fireplace and an old stone fireplace roaring and everything. And we sat and we played a game of chess on this old set in this old library, and we drank single malt while we were there. Now I can't for the life of me remember what we drank, but if I had a choice, it was almost certainly Lagavulin. And I was reminded of that too. So I think either one of those experiences is the right kind of atmosphere for this.
Perfect. I would love to be in either spot. That sounds great. All right, Justin, it's last call here at the Indie Pub. Can you give us an indie published book or two or three or more that you want more people to check out?
I really easy. I'm going to say all of the other SPFBO finalists, and a lot of the semi-finalists and a lot of the books that didn't get through. I mean, just go check out SPFBO. Check out the books that were in there. In particular, I really loved, funnily enough, the books that came second and third in my year, which is Patrick Samphire's Shadow of a Dead God, which is a sort of, how does he describe it? A snarky detective noir, I think. Snarky mystery noir. Anyway, it's funny and clever, and it's very like an urban fantasy kind of detective, but set in a more traditional fantasy world. It's full of really clever ideas, and the main character is just a likable idiot, basically. Nice. And then Michael R. Fletcher's I was going to say She Dreams in Blood. That's the sequel. What's the first one called? Blackstone Heart. If you like grimdark, it's very grimdark. It's basically about a demon summoner, and there's a lot of kind of putting himself back together by murdering variations of himself. It's a good one as well. So in particular, I would say those two I really enjoyed. But any of the finalists, check out the semi-finalists. There's a book called Radio I hear is pretty good.
Yeah,
that I think people might want to check out. It's
snuck into the semi-finals somehow. It's not so bad. Definitely worth a read.
It's got a really cool premise about sort of, is it 1920s Paris? Is that right? Something like that.
I think I heard that, really cool. That somewhere.
That's on my to read list, definitely. but yeah, there's so many good books in there that are worth checking out that I would recommend. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, same question, but for any other media, indie or not.
I'm really enjoying the current superhero renaissance, by which I don't mean the MCU stuff, because that doesn't need more attention, but I do love the MCU, to be fair. But stuff like the more dark stuff, and I've long thought about writing a more sort of realistic, gritty kind of superhero thing, and then all of a sudden we've got to glut them. So you've got stuff like The Boys on Amazon, which also I've read some of the comics of that's inspired by. Invincible, also Amazon, which is the more animated one, which is just really good. Stuff like that. That's those two are the first two that jumped to mind. Brightburn I thought was pretty good.
Was that the
what if Superman was evil, basically?
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating one as well. I like stuff that plays with the superhero idea. There's if DC would ever let me, DC did this brilliant sort of what if future style series called Kingdom Come. All the art was by Alex Ross. It was just beautiful, amazing. And it was essentially set in the future where loads of the next generation of heroes had come along and they were all really irresponsible and just fighting, beating the crap out of each other. And the Justice League kind of have to come out of retirement to try and fix the mess of the world that they've created. And it's just a brilliant story. And I would kill for DC to just ask me to adapt that into TV or film for them. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, while we're speaking about other media as well, the other thing I would recommend is a series that I think deserves much better than it gets treated with in the adaptation of series so far is Legion of Superheroes, which is the sort of 30th century the heroes thing. That had some really great storylines in it. There was a run by Paul Levitz that was just definitive for them. But the storyline, the Great Darkness saga, which was my introduction to Darkseid back in the, I guess, 80s. Is brilliant. It's just a great example of how you can do a storyline and handle a massive cast of characters and yet still have them all feature and be real and be varied and be different. It's really great. And then there was a brilliant run after Levitz by the artist Keith Giffen, who did a run on it. And it was really dark. There was like a 5-year jump. Lots of people had died, people were missing, the universe was in a state, and it was great. I really loved it. And then it got cancelled because nobody was reading it because it was too dark basically for its time. And this was kind of early 90s maybe, and it just got cancelled because nobody was reading it. But I've still got all my copies in a box in the garage. But Keith Giffen's run on Legion of Superheroes tragically cut short, but probably an early precursor to some of the more gritty, darker superhero stories we're seeing now.
All right, and tell our listeners what you have going on and where they can find you and your work.
What I have going on is, well, as I say, I've written the first draft of the next Eden book 2. When that will come out and in what format is up in the air at the moment, as my agent is currently working on seeing if there's a deal to be done for the series. So if that happens, the expectation would be The Lost War will be republished by the publisher, and then the following year, I guess, book 2 would come out. If that doesn't happen, it'll be out sooner because I'll be doing it myself. It all depends on what happens there. So really, that's kind of I'm a little bit in limbo at the moment. There's not. I had expected that book 2 would be out soonish, if not by now. But you know, one of the joys of the upside of winning SPFBO was signing with an agent and potentially looking at the possibility of a deal with a bigger platform. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Awesome.
And where can they find me? They can find, I mean, this everywhere. But on social media, I'm relatively active on Facebook. I haven't been as much recently because there just hasn't been as much writing news to tell. I've got a Facebook page at just Justin Lee Anderson. I tend to keep that just to writing and geeky stuff. If you're interested in reading me ranting about politics most of the time, I'm also on Twitter at AuthorJLA, where I also talk about books and stuff, but most often than not, I rant about politics. And I'm also on Instagram, Justin Lee Anderson Author, where I haven't posted much in the last year because I haven't gone anywhere in order to take photographs to post onto Instagram. But those are the places where I'm easily found online if you want to get in touch.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Indie Pub. If you like what you hear, consider giving us a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our indie investigations or boozy banter. I've been your host, Jay Rushing, and we'll see you back in the pub next time.